Hello, I'm Brian Martin, and I want to welcome you to another edition of What Was Jesus Thinking? Every week, I examine the gospel lesson that's presented from the Revised Common Lectionary, and well, just about every week, things happen, and we we do the best we can. The Revised Common Lectionary is a lectionary or the reading guide for scriptures that's used in churches throughout the world. Episcopal churches, Methodist churches, some Baptist churches even, Catholic churches, lots of churches use it. This week it's the second Sunday of Easter, and the gospel lesson is from John chapter, let's see, is it chapter 19? let me find it real quick there so I'm on the right page. And it's another resurrection appearance of Jesus. And these are important. And the question that I always want to ask, and the question I'm asking for you to take into consideration, is what was Jesus thinking? And the reason that I would like you to consider that is because I don't think that people are aware of where their thoughts come from, or how they happen, or why they exist, or that they even have some sense of control over their thoughts. Do you have control over your thoughts? And the answer is, well, yes. But the question that before that is, do you even know what a thought is? And so this is not an easy thing for people to grasp hold of, that they actually can control their thinking process. Most people just assume that they're subject to their thinking process, but in reality, our thinking is subject to our will and what we want it to be. So instead of thinking negative things, we can think of anything in the world that's loving in place of it. And here is the gospel lesson today, and we're looking for what was Jesus thinking. We're reading from John chapter 20, and it's verses 19 through 31. When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, the day of the resurrection, and the door of the house where the disciples had met were locked because they were afraid, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Now, in my congregations, I always stop there and I say, what was it that Jesus said to them? And they say, "Peace be with you." Because that's a really important passage here, a part of what Jesus is doing. And we have to ask the question, okay, what was Jesus thinking? What was it that made him say to them, "Peace be with you"? Well, obviously he knew they were afraid, right? But what more is behind that in Jesus' thinking process? After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side, and the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. Okay, so there was something different about Jesus, and they needed to see his hands and his side to confirm in their mind who he was. And Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you." Now, what was it that Jesus said to them again? That's right, peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you. All right, so this is a commissioning experience. Jesus is getting ready to launch them out into the world in a different type of reality. The previous reality was that Jesus was always around. Jesus was teaching them. Jesus was showing them. Jesus was modeling what to do. Jesus was telling them what to say. But now it's different. So life is going to be totally unexpected for these disciples. And Jesus is trying to prepare them a little bit before it. So in Jesus' mind, in Jesus' thinking, he's wanting his disciples to feel more equipped so they can begin and go out into a whole different way of thinking. This is going to be a radical change for them. It's a completely different way of existence. They always have had the company of Jesus, the modeling of Jesus, the loving of Jesus in every interaction. And now, guess what? That's gone. So you can understand why Jesus is thinking that these people need some help. And so he's going to give them some help. And what happens next is really kind of fun and interesting. And when he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit." Now, lots of interesting teaching about what this means and how it applies to their life, but it was something that took place. There was an exchange that happened, and Jesus is using a ritual. He's breathing on them an act to convey some important meaning and significance to them. That's why I love rituals, because rituals are things that have meaning and significance. And breathing doesn't have a whole lot of meaning or significance. In reality, it doesn't. I mean, all the time you're breathing unconsciously in and out. Now, I always try to be aware of my breathing as much as I possibly can. And I have my own ritual so that when I inhale, I say, "I am grateful." And when I exhale, "I love you." So my gratitude is always followed by love. And so that makes my breathing special to me. It makes it, my ritual breathing makes it special. It makes an ordinary, common breathing thing that happens, millions of times in a human life? It makes that particular event special. And this is exactly what Jesus is doing at this particular time. He's making the breathing event special. Now, what happens when you breathe? Or let me rephrase that. What happens when you don't breathe? Think about that for a minute. That doesn't take a whole lot, does it? If you don't breathe, you don't live. Jesus is breathing on them. He's giving them life. He's giving them power in this particular ritual. And he's calling it, "Receive the Holy Spirit." This is different. This is not what they've experienced before. There's a transfer that's going on here. And in Jesus' mind, it needs to be an empowering event, because guess what? They need the power. Just like you need the power for your daily activities. And this is part of the resurrection process. Now remember, resurrection is completely unknown to these people. They've seen people rise from the dead, but what they're witnessing and observing with Jesus is not just a simple resurrection from the dead, but into a glorious state and into a future that infuses humanity with something that had never happened before in its history. And that's the power of the resurrection. And that power of the resurrection is consistent now. It's not something that happened one time. It's not a historical event. It is the beginning and a continuous outpouring of love and power, even a sound mind, so that we can control our thinking about the events that are going on around us at any particular time. So with COVID-19 right now, and there's so much fear and so much uncertainty, and everybody's talking about what life is going to be different, how it's going to be different when the crisis has abated. We have a wonderful opportunity of being able to help and to encourage and to empower people. And this is part of the resurrection process that we get and we live and we experience on a daily basis. I love this season because it gives us weeks to be able to contemplate this and to think about how resurrection power is alive in us to make a difference in us. And so this is Jesus' thinking process. He's thinking, I'm going to empower these people. I'm going to give them something they won't ever forget. Their life is never going to be the same again. And they're never going to have opportunities like this that are coming up ever again. This is the most wonderful transformational time in a history. He's aware of that. And he breathes on them this funny little ritual. And then he says to them, if you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven. And if you retain the sins of any, they are retained. Now, the forgiveness of sin is reserved for a unique population. And usually there's some kind of a process that's involved in this. But Jesus is taking this whole concept and moving it into a whole new direction. He's saying, you can do this. Now, in the past, nobody could ever do this. There was no particular group that could do this except for an exclusive group of people who participated in a sacrificial system. And now Jesus is saying, this is a whole new ballgame. There's a whole new process, and you are involved in it. So forgiveness from what? Forgiveness from sins. There's all kinds of ways that you apply forgiveness in people's lives. I have a lot to say about that at another time. But Thomas, who is called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, we have seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless I see the marks of the nails in his hands and put my finger in the mark of the nails and my hand in his side, I will not believe. A week later, so we are a week later after Easter now, a week later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them this time. And although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said to them, now can you imagine what Jesus said to them? Well, he's going to say it again, and this is the third time. Again, this is something that's happening with intention and forethought. And Jesus knows that this is a ritual that will be needed, and they'll have to recall it and experience it. Do you remember when Jesus came and he gave us peace and he breathed on us? They don't forget about that. They hold on to that. It empowers them, and they are able to empower others as a result of that. Then he said to Thomas, put your finger here and see my hand. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe. Now, I think that this was not a message just for Thomas, but for every person who has ever been a follower of Jesus. That there's so much power in the love and the example that he gave us that we can embrace and hold. It's part of our spiritual DNA that we can convey to others. And I'm afraid that most Christians don't understand that. They think that their faith is just something they do, and they don't understand the significance of the power they have. It's the power to change people's lives through the power of love. It's helping them with our words, our encouragement. It's helping them with our hands and our actions and the modeling that we do for other people. It's helping them when we control our thoughts and we think thoughts more along the lines of what Jesus was thinking. Constantly looking for ways to love and to help other people. And the story continues. Thomas answered, my Lord and my God. And Jesus said to him, have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe. And then there is this little ending. Now, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing in him, you have life in his name. You may have life in his name. Now, let's take that to its logical conclusion. What is the purpose of that life? And what is it that we do with that life? Because we just don't sit on it, right? We don't just sit back and say, Isn't it wonderful? I have life. That's a great thought. That's an empty thought. It's a shallow thought, and it's a thought that doesn't go anywhere. The thinking of Jesus was an active and a continuous thinking. This is what he wanted them to do. He wanted them to take his message of love and share it throughout the world. And he wanted to begin right there and right then. And so he breathed on them, he gave them peace, and he told them to go out. And that's what people are to do. We're to go out. Fortunately, there's all kinds of wonderful examples that are going on in the world right now, in spite of the corona. Well, maybe because of the virus and the pandemic. Thousands and millions of people are helping. And while they're helping, they're putting their own lives on the line. I'm talking about the clerks at the grocery store. I'm talking about the doctors and the nurses and the entire medical staff at the hospitals that are treating people. I'm talking about people who are continuing to provide essential services and going places, trying to take precautions, but nevertheless know that they have to do what they have to do so that people can carry on and so that they can be safe. There are so many wonderful examples now. I've been calling people on a regular basis, just checking in with them. I call it a care call. I call them, I say, how's it going? I just want you to know that I'm thinking about you. And I know that people are going crazy sitting in their own homes. I was watching CBS Sunday Morning, and then Jim Gaffigan, the stand-up comic. You know, he's a wonderful human being, and he has a family of 5 kids, and they were stuck in a little apartment in New York, and he feels like he's going crazy. And this isolation that people are experiencing is real. And people really need something as simple as a phone call to check on them. So I leave messages if I'm not able to reach some people, and I get a message back, and sometimes I catch the message, and sometimes it goes to my voicemail. And I can't tell you how wonderful it is to hear in their voice, oh my God, and thank you so much for calling. We've been, going through this, but we're okay. We really, really appreciate the call. I'm inviting you, because this is probably going to be going on for a little bit longer. I'm inviting you to call people and to ask them how they're doing. Even if you're watching this a year or 5 years after the pandemic, still the necessity of reaching out to people is real and it's important. And you have power. You have resurrection power that's resident inside of you. And power to love, and power to care, and power to give, and power to inspire. And it's an incredible power, this resurrection power. Don't minimize the resurrection power. It's far greater than what you can think of or imagine. It's not simply tied to the event of one person coming back to life. It's tied to an entire way of being as a human being, loving and caring and giving hope and spreading a message of love. I'm Brian Martin. Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to seeing you next week at this time. Bye-bye.